On November 4th, the Biden administration made a blatantly unconstitutional, authoritarian power grab. Crafted by unelected bureaucrats over at the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, the Biden Department of Labor issued a sweeping mandate that confronted tens of millions of Americans with an unthinkable choice. You can get vaccinated, you can get tested and wear a mask to work, or you can lose your job. How did President Biden and OSHA plan to pull this off? By commandeering every company in America with more than 100 employees as the enforcement arm of the federal government. Under the administration's edict, companies would be fined around $13,600 per violation. A violation in this case is simply choosing not to discriminate between your vaccinated and unvaccinated employees. Penalties for what the government called egregious violations could be far higher, over $136,000 according to one official, for what the administration deemed bad actor employers who willfully disregard their unconstitutional demands. These draconian fines would crush many small and even medium-sized businesses overnight. Even in the midst of a staggering labor shortage, thousands have already lost their jobs for not falling in line with their company's vaccine mandates. Millions more could now suffer that same fate. Strange to say, but business owners and C-suite executives became the last line of defense between everyday Americans and autocracy. Like thousands of American businesses, the Daily Wire, where I'm co-founder and co-CEO, has over 100 employees. And like every business, whether they meet that magic number of 100 employees or not, and by the way, they already want to apply this rule to even smaller businesses too, well, we're not in charge of policing the private medical decisions of the people who work for us. In fact, if businesses were to insert themselves into the medical decisions of their employees, well, they'd be exposing themselves to potential liability for things like discrimination, retaliation, privacy violations, and even ADA noncompliance. Look, I've said this since well before President Biden made his initial vaccine mandate announcement back in September, but it bears repeating. The Daily Wire is not anti-vaccine. I'm personally very pro-vaccine. I think the COVID vaccines are some of the greatest scientific achievements so far in the 21st century. But see, that's just the point. That's my opinion. And my opinion doesn't put me in charge of making personal medical choices for the people who work for me. Some of our employees have chosen to get the vaccine. Others have natural immunity after previously contracting COVID-19. Others have autoimmune conditions or previous allergic reactions to vaccines that make them hesitant. Still others have personal or religious objections to the COVID-19 vaccine. OSHA's politically driven rule took none of that into account. Instead, the administration tried to fit a square peg into a round hole by applying this broad, expansive, one-size-fits-all mandate to a randomly selected portion of the American workforce. This mandate is not just wrong, it's illegal under federal law. The Constitution simply doesn't grant the federal government the power to insert itself into employment relationships this way, and even if it did, Congress certainly never delegated that power to OSHA. And that's why we at the Daily Wire didn't go along with it. We weren't going to be co-opted by the government or threatened into stripping our employees of their God-given constitutionally protected rights. Hard pass, Mr. President. Immediately after the administration officially released its mandate, the Daily Wire, with the help of Harmeet K. Dillon of the Dillon Law Group and Alliance Defending Freedom, filed a lawsuit to challenge it. Within just 2 weeks, our lawsuit was at the leading edge of a whole host of challenges that were all consolidated before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. The blowback was so strong that OSHA was forced to temporarily suspend its own rule before it ever had a chance to enforce it. But that's not the end of the story. OSHA hasn't given up on the rule, and they're continuing to defend it in court even today. The government has no authority to unilaterally declare that employees themselves are some sort of workplace hazard. That's something that President Biden and several key leaders in his administration acknowledged as recently as this summer. It's still true today. In fact, the Biden administration has admitted that using OSHA's rarely used emergency temporary standard is, quote, the ultimate workaround for the federal government to require vaccinations. When an administration blatantly exploits and then admits to exploiting the law in hopes of finding a loophole to get what it wants, we should all stand up and oppose it. This isn't about vaccines. It isn't about science or even about COVID-19. Make no mistake, this is about freedom. After all, there's a word for when a government coerces your employer to fire you for your own private medical decisions. That word is tyranny. And our response to tyranny is simple. No. No, we won't stand by while you rob us of our God-given freedoms. You can follow our case at adflegal.org, subscribe to ADF on YouTube, or follow them on Facebook to learn more.